listener production.
Hi, Natarsha Belling with you and welcome to the afternoon edition of The Briefing. Coming up in our deep dive, the new bombshell memoir from journalist Olivia Nuzzi. We find out what the US reporter revealed about her alleged digital affair with RFK Junior in the lead up to last year's US presidential election and serious conflicts of interest. Those details in just a moment. But first, let's check the afternoon headlines this Friday, the 5th of December. Victoria Police have concluded a 5-day targeted search for fugitive Dezi Freeman 4 months after he allegedly shot dead 2 police officers in Porpunka. Specialist teams spent the past week combing a rugged section of Mount Buffalo National Park, this time searching specifically for evidence or Freeman's body. Police say no trace was found, but almost 2,000 intelligence leads have now been investigated and a $1 million reward remains on offer, the largest in Victorian history. Assistant Commissioner Martin O'Brien says officers are using every available resource and are determined to bring the case to a resolution. 2 gunmen are still at large after opening fire in the car park of a Sydney shopping centre this morning. The man who authorities suspect was the intended target of the shooting was leaving a gym in Gregory Hills just after 8:30 this morning. A number of witnesses say they saw 2 men in balaclavas running across the car park and open fire, with the targeted man managing to duck around vehicles and incredibly escape uninjured. Here is Acting Superintendent Gretchen Atkins from New South Wales Police.
Number of shots were fired into the car park. The intended target was not injured in any way, and then they left the scene. The shots that were fired, a number of rounds went into parked cars as well as into the building of a business nearby, which is obviously very, very concerning for us. Just after 8:30 in an area like this, it's exceptionally busy. We are very, very fortunate that no person was injured, let alone seriously killed.
And a number of countries will boycott this year's Eurovision Song Contest after Israel was allowed to compete in the competition. The European Broadcasting Union opted not to vote on calls to exclude the country over the war in Gaza. The decision has triggered major backlash. Spain, Ireland, the Netherlands and Slovenia have all announced they will boycott the 2026 contest, saying Israel's involvement undermines the event's neutrality amid the humanitarian crisis. Australia will still take part, with SBS stating that, quote, as a public broadcaster, making a decision to be involved based on the inclusion or exclusion of any country would undermine its editorial independence and impartiality. Several other European countries are still considering their position. Now it's time to get into our deep dive on the new memoir from US journalist Olivia Nuzzi. The controversial reporter has released her long-awaited tell-all on the alleged digital affair with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., claims he denies. Joining us is Crikey's reporter-at-large and US political expert Charlie Lewis, who explains why these latest revelations pose serious questions over conflicts of interest in the US and how a very powerful American politician from the famous Kennedy dynasty continues to be untouchable. Charlie, thanks so much for joining us. So tell us, who is Olivia Nuzzi and why should we care about this story?
So Nuzzi is a long-time, quite high-profile American political journalist. She first came to prominence back in 2013 when she was 20 years old. She was working as an intern for then New York mayoral candidate Anthony Weiner, who's later encountered many disgraces of his own. And she wrote about her experiences, and that was kind of her sort of foot into the door of political journalism. By 2017, when she was 24, she had become the Washington correspondent for New York Magazine, which is the role that she held for a long time after that. So she's always had a bit of a sense of, there's a very clear-eyed ambition that she's shown and an ability to kind of find the spotlight. And she would write these very gossipy but quite lyrical pieces about American politics and kind of became one of those journalists that was really built for the Trump era. Was very good at reporting on that particular administration. So the first time I kind of really seriously engaged with her work was a piece that she wrote for New York Magazine, which was headlined, I believe it was the conspiracy of silence around Joe Biden. So this was a piece that was one of the first really explicit allegations in the mainstream media that not only was then President Joe Biden quite diminished mentally and physically and possibly too frail to hold a job as taxing as president, but that there was a very concerted effort from a lot of the people around him to keep that information away from the public. It was a very influential piece. It sort of really did kick off the debate that ended with President Biden pulling out of the race in 2024 and being replaced by Kamala Harris, his VP. So that was the first major time that I really engaged with one of her pieces seriously. And I think that piece, whatever else you'd like to say about Nuzzi, that piece has probably been vindicated by the passage of time, one way or another. Then in September 2024, so just before the actual poll, it's reported, I believe it was by CNN first, that she had engaged in an appropriate relationship with presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. of the Democratic Kennedy dynasty, who then went on to become the health secretary in Donald Trump's second administration after Trump won the 2024 election. She was placed on leave and then eventually left that role. It's always been very vague until now. Actually, it's still very contested, but it was always very vague at the time exactly what that relationship involved and whether it was physical or merely romantic or what it kind of involved. So the major problem with this was that it had not been disclosed to anyone, let alone her employers, and she had covered the election in which he had been a participant, including his own campaign. So that kind of brings us up to the events of the last couple of weeks when the little cherry bomb that's been placed kind of goes off all over again.
So this memoir, she finally breaks her silence over what Olivia alleges is she did not have a physical affair with RFK Jr. It was, quote, a digital affair.
Yes. And this has come kind of accompanied with, so she took a year away from kind of the spotlight, I suppose, during which time she managed to get a job as the West Coast editor of Vanity Fair, which is where the excerpt of her recent memoir was published. Prior to that publication of that excerpt, she also did I would call it a quite chummy profile with the New York Times writer Jacob Bernstein, who incidentally is the son of Watergate legend Carl Bernstein and screenwriter Nora Ephron, because why not? That just seems to fit the general vibe of this story.
Yes.
So that comes out, and then the following day, I believe, it's the excerpt, which is a very we can get into the actual quality of the work itself a bit later, but it's a very lyrical account of her involvement in this scandal. The bit that kind of really throws the cat among the pigeons is that the person with whom Nuzzi was involved at the time of the affair with RFK Jr. is a guy called Ryan Lizzer, who is also a fairly high-profile political journalist, was previously at Politico and also mainly The New Yorker. He was eventually fired for allegations of sexual misconduct, which he vehemently denies. He, on his Substack, writes another account of his relationship with Nuzzi, which is very, very elusive and very, very personal. And it leads you to believe, it's called How I Found Out Part 1. And the piece leads you to believe that he is going to tell you how he found out about the affair with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. But then the twist in the tale is that he's actually writing about an alleged affair that she had 4 years earlier with former Republican governor of South Carolina, Mark Sanford. He then promises part 2. She denies that through a lawyer. And there's been a lot of back and forth in terms of who said what and who's done what to whom. He has now delivered a part 2, which is about RFK. Very, very savvily, he has put that behind a paywall. So you have to pay him to read the whole account. But not before you read some quite graphic, erotic writing that allegedly RFK sent to Nuzzi while Lizzer and Nuzzi were together. So I think that just about brings us up to date.
From a serious note, how damaging are these revelations to the Trump administration and the fact that she didn't declare any clear conflict of interest as a journalist, and there are allegations she continued to lie to her boss?
Yeah. Well, that's a really interesting question. And I think one of the serious elements to this, or one of the less frivolous ones, is the idea that a high-profile journalist and a high-profile member of an administration could have an undeclared affair during the coverage that journalist did of that candidate's campaign. That would be a major, major scandal in any other presidency you care to name. Any other. There's no other presidency where that wouldn't be the main story for weeks at a time. That's not how that's played out in this case. It's being treated the way that we've been treating it, as a fun bit of gossip, as a salacious entertainment story. It's barely registered in terms of the Trump administration itself. There's a few reasons for that I would probably put forward. One, there are and always have been different rules that apply to Trump and his ability to withstand scandal. Things just don't stick to him very much. And to the extent that they do, he's got enough on his plate. We've got enough things that are arguably even more serious going on. Well, not even arguably. There's the series of very, very legally questionable attacks that he's been mounting on alleged drug boats in the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific, which are now being described as potential war crimes. There is obviously the ongoing saga around what role he plays in the Epstein files. There was the longest government shutdown in American history. These are all crowding out what would otherwise probably be a major scandal for him. And I suppose just the other sort of serious and maybe slightly dispiriting element to this is it's a reminder just how often the world can turn on the personal neuroses and sexual needs of dysfunctional, high-profile individuals who don't ever appear to have to face any consequences for what they do. Nuzzi gets another job. I'm sure Ryan Liz's Substack is doing very well. I've not heard any rumors that there's going to be any kind of move to get RFK Junior out of his role. And these are very influential people. I mean, we haven't even touched upon what RFK is doing to the American health system, such as it is. As we talked about before, Nuzzi and Ryan Lizza have both written incredibly influential and important pieces of American journalism in the last few years that have cost people in various administrations their jobs, has changed the course of various elections. And so to be found out that, for it to be found out that that all of this was potentially at least involved a huge undeclared conflict of interest is quite dispiriting.
Has there been any comment at all? And a lot of people argue he's Teflon John. Any implications or comments or denials from RFK Jr. over this? Because at the time, he was married with this alleged affair.
Yeah. At the time the original scandal broke, a spokesperson for him announced that the only time that they had met was for the piece that Nuzzi had written about him in 2023, and that it was a hit piece and that there was no ongoing relationship there. So that's about all that he's said on the matter. And I think, again, Lizza and Nuzzi have done him quite a service here by making it about the two of them and the back and forth about what those two allege. So I feel that the spotlight on this issue has been very much on them, and it hasn't quite dragged him in as much as it might have otherwise.
And Charlie, the other question, you started off, and I thought this is a brilliant analogy, where we know there was a piece written by Olivia that was incredibly critical of and questioning Joe Biden's health, which, let's be honest, was a huge elephant in the room that was not reported at the time, and unfairly so. Do you think this is payback for her going out there and telling the truth to start with, especially from the Democrats?
Interesting. That connection hadn't occurred to me, and I don't see it. If I'm honest, I think it's worth remembering. She wrote this book of her own volition. This is very much at her initiation that this is all returned to the public square in the same way that it has. She had another job. She could have stayed as a Vanity Fair is not a terrible place to end up if you had a bit of a scandal. So I think that the reason that this has caught on the way it has is one, through the actions of the people involved, from the just incredibly salacious details that the story involves, and the fact that journalists like talking about themselves, and this is a manna from heaven to write about. It's the kind of story that in very dark times can be a little bit of a relief, despite the more serious elements to it.
It is a very interesting story, one may say. Charlie, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
That was Crikey's reporter at large, Charlie Lewis. And that's it for this episode of the afternoon edition of The Briefing. We'll be back tomorrow with the weekend briefing. Antoinette is joined by TikTok's favourite divorce lawyer, Fadan Shevket.
As I sort of stayed on it, and it becomes taxing on you to do so much content, like 2 videos a day or whatever. I don't get paid for it. There's no creator program, right? So it's not like TikTok are paying me to get people on their app and watch their app. What do I get from TikTok? Zero. So after a while, you're like, you know what? I probably should get paid for doing this because now that I'm doing so much, it seems like a bit of a job.
And we'd love you to subscribe or follow us on Instagram @The Briefing Podcast. I'm Natarsha Belling. See you next time.